Welcome to 6 Million Seeds. I'm Meryl Fury.
And I'm Carrie Bruno. We are healthcare professionals and co-creators of this podcast. Today's episode of 6 Million Seeds is brought to you by Carrot Dogs. Our guest on this week's episode is Karen Smith. She has over 16 years of experience as a registered dietitian in various settings, including public health, community nutrition programming, and clinical practice. She has been a certified diabetes care and education specialist since 2017, is a member of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, and a certified Food for Life instructor. During our conversation today, we touch on various topics, such as how Karen ate growing up, what the transition to plant-based eating for her and her children was like, and how her career as a dietitian has been impacted because of this transition. Throughout our discussion, it is clear that Karen is passionate about providing evidence-based nutrition education and empowering others to achieve their goals and realize their capabilities and potential. So let's jump right in.
All right, it's Karen Smith. Yay! So good to see you.
Great to see you too.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. So lucky we are. So we have like a pile of questions for you. We're going to try not to hit you with them all at once, but we are so aware and grateful that you get to spend time in a clinical setting working with people as registered dietitians. So you see a lot of, you see nutrition from a very different perspective than most people get to see it. Most of us are just like going to the grocery store and eating food, or going to the takeout or the whatever restaurant, and we just eat, and we have questions around that, but you get to see the whole other side. So we're going to like dig into that just a little bit. Before that though, our first question is, what was food like for you when you were growing up?
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I feel really fortunate to have been brought up in a family. I'm one of 4 kids. I'm the third. And my mom, her mom was one of 16 children.
Ooh, wow.
And my great grandmother, who I never had the opportunity to meet, came over to the United States from Poland. And from what I understand, because she lived with my mom growing up, my mom, got to be in the kitchen alongside her grandmother, baking bread and making pierogies and stuffing cabbage, right? So there were lots of traditional Polish dishes, not on the average, weeknight when my mom was working. She was a registered nurse for many years. And, looking back now, I give her like so much credit for like going, working from 7 to 3:30, coming home, getting dinner prepared for the family. And from what I remember, like always having it on the table by the time my dad was home from work around like 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the evening. And I feel like I ate a rather healthy variety of foods. We always had, fruits and vegetables. My parents, mainly my dad, has always grown a rather large vegetable garden in the summer. So I have memories of, just going out there, picking tomatoes off the vine and eating them, and beans, and like loving that as a kid.
So backing up a little bit, it sounds like even though you were eating plenty of fruits and vegetables growing up, you weren't plant-based. When did that tide turn, and what kind of caused that change for you?
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I ate my fair share of especially dairy products, where, I was a kid who drank milk every single day and thought that that was wonderful for me. And as an athlete, made sure I drank my milk after practice, and had terrible acne. I wonder now, oh my gosh, how big a role did the dairy play, in my acne, because it was awful. And I felt terrible about myself. It's hard to want to be seen when you don't feel good about your skin. Lots of ice cream and cheese. So I certainly had my fair share of foods that weren't healthy. And then I would say in my 30s was when, so I was going through a very, and so I'm already practicing as a dietitian, right? Like I've been through school, I've done my dietetic internship, I'm a dietitian, I'm working with lots of patients. And at that time, mostly long-term care facilities, because those hours fit my life as a mom quite well. I could go in whenever. And like feeling super frustrated because I'm like, I am, reviewing what people are eating. And many people were there for a short term, like they were there to just have physical therapy. Maybe they had a stroke or a hip replacement, and then they were going to go home. So I worked a lot with, helping them understand what a healthy diet might look like, or maybe they wanted to lose some weight while they were there. And of course, the constraints of like what was served to them or what was available in the kitchen also made it challenging because it's not healthy food. It's like lots of stuff out of cans, at least where I worked. Meat was, if someone was vegetarian, and like the one person I can remember who did eat a vegan diet, it was like such a challenge for the food service staff to put something together for her that wasn't just a plate of like iceberg lettuce and a banana. Like it blew my mind. So at that time, I was just feeling frustrated because the things that I had learned as a dietitian, like, okay, let's choose chicken, the lean meat, or tuna fish, and, having skim milk instead of whole milk, right? And for people with diabetes at that time, it was like having a carbohydrate restricted diet. And that's still popular, in many healthcare facilities, like, oh, you have to count your carbohydrates and we have to reduce them if you have diabetes, which I now know is ridiculous. But I was, doing the things that I had been taught and realizing like no one is getting better eating this way. Like not a single person with type 2 diabetes, had success reversing their diabetes, reducing medications.
You just see the insulin numbers start to slowly creep up.
Right. It was like, so, and like the blood glucose, their numbers at that time too, like it just seemed like there was no rhyme or reason, right? Like with what they were eating, because everything they were eating was pretty unhealthy, at least in the facility where I worked. So I just felt really frustrated, like, wow, I am not enjoying my job. And I was also not enjoying my marriage. And like stress was super high in my life and ended up eventually getting divorced, which honestly was the turning point for me, because removing myself from like a very toxic home environment where my stress every single day was super high at home, and then going to a job where I felt like I had no purpose, right? Like I was pretty miserable at that point in my life, and being able to remove myself from the home situation allowed me some space and time to start doing things again that I really enjoyed, like running. And that helped with my stress management, like seeing a therapist. Right. So like I had to deal with that stress in my life first to even be open to the idea of a plant-based diet, because in hindsight, I am sure that I had been exposed to it. I had a sister-in-law who was eating a vegan diet and I was like, oh, that's cool. Great. But like I never considered it for myself. And I think just because I had so much else going on, it just seemed like one thing more, to that would need my attention. So I heard Dr. Joel Fuhrman speak just one night, after kids are in bed and I'm kind of relaxing, I'm flipping through the stations and turn to PBS. And there's Joel Fuhrman, talking about eat to live. And I was like, how do I not know this? Like, of course, it makes perfect sense, right? That humans should be eating plant foods, and that when we do that, things like, high blood pressure go away, high cholesterol go away, type 2 diabetes goes away in many, many instances. And so I jumped right in. Like, that's what's crazy. It's like that one Like, I just feel like it was presented to me at the right time in my life,
Yeah.
where my mind was open to it. And I was like, cool. I remember like ordering his book as I'm watching. So this is like going on 8 years ago.
Mm.
And, reading it really quickly and just being like, all right, I'm doing it. And for the most part, jumped right in. There were a few foods, cheese, creamer in my coffee that like took a little bit more time for me to remove. But the meat part for me was super easy. I
Mhm.
think probably because I had the familiarity of like, oh yeah, I like beans. I know what lentils are. I can
Right.
Yeah.
do this.
Right.
Easy substitutes for that. Yeah.
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 So what kind of changes did you notice after you switched your diet?
Well, definitely. I mean, at that point in my life, my acne was not so bad, but my skin still improved. Like, it just looked healthier and better. And I felt better, like from an energy perspective and from an emotional perspective, as someone who's had anxiety, I think from like as early on as I can remember, like being 5 and just being like, I want to go to this birthday party, but I don't want to go to the birthday party. Like, I was the kid who I would get dropped off somewhere and like cling to my mom and cry, and she would leave and I would be fine. But I remember like, and anxiety has just been something that I've had for ever, it seems. And so I feel like my nutrition now plays a huge role in helping me. Like, it's less, I still have it, but like I have strategies for managing it now for sure. And the food helps for sure. And also from the perspective that having these like boundaries on what I eat has really liberated the way that I think about food and how much time I spend thinking about it. So I also spent quite a few years of my teenage, probably even up until the point that I changed to a plant-based diet, like always thinking about food. Like, it just occupied a lot of brain space. And, there were periods of my life where I would binge eat and then compensate for that as an athlete. And I've since learned like, oh, it's really common for certain types of female athletes to have eating disorders, right? Because we're meant to look a certain way. We're meant to, and I had a coach in college, like who, you got caught on campus eating an ice cream cone and like, he would say something to you,
boy.
right? So I, ate in, private. I didn't want people to know about it. So like, there was lots of control issues with food that have been removed. Like, this way of eating for me has just given me like this huge sense of freedom. And also, it just simplifies my life. Like, I want to be thinking about a lot more during my day than what I'm eating next. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yes,
Yes.
And I see it, in the clients and patients that I work with now. Like, I remember, like, I feel like I have that empathy when I hear them talking about their struggles, whether it's with weight or just with emotional eating, that I'm like, yeah, I remember what that was like, and it certainly can be better for you.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So do you mind if I ask you a question about your work life, your experience in the clinics? So Karen works at the Barnard Medical Center. And in that capacity, tell me if I'm wrong, I could be speaking way out of turn here, but you're working with people, and particularly you're coaching and counseling on whole food, plant-based type eating, right?
Correct.
Okay. So I would like to know, what kind of connection do you see? What are the like similarities and parallels or correlations that you see between, in your clients, right, between emotional states and situations and the food choices they make?
I honestly feel like that plays an enormous part of, I wish I had like a study to quote, right? Of like how stress,
Mhm.
how anxiety, how just uncomfortable emotions that we have play a role in our food choices. And so, which is why, like in my conversations with people, I ask, about all of those 6 pillars of lifestyle medicine, especially like, how's stress in your life? Tell me what that's like. And then like, how do you manage it? Like, especially when I ask that question and people say like, oh, it's terrible. I have so much stress. Because it often interferes with our ability to make good choices, right? Just those, when we have that physical manifestation, right? Like just imagine like when you're stressed, like how it feels in your body, like it's not good, right? And so the food often is that thing that helps us feel a little better, because as humans, we want to be comfortable. We don't want to feel uncomfortable, right? And that food is like a quick, convenient way for so many people to get a hit of dopamine, right? To have that pleasure for a moment. The stress hasn't been, managed in any way, right? Like that's still there. And obviously we all have stress in our lives, but how we deal with it, how we manage it, like the strategies we have to cope so that we aren't in this chronic state of just like physically feeling that tension or that like pit in our stomach, that are really, I think, cues, like those physical sensations that I help people identify as like, those are cues that there's something going on.
Mm.
And there are strategies other than eating, the fries, the milkshake, the burger, the pizza, whatever, the cookies, even
Ice
if it's
cream.
plant-based food,
Yeah.
right? Like many people I work with are already eating a plant-based diet, and, will like go for the chips, go for the plant-based, the vegan cookies, the vegan ice cream, the chocolate, whatever it is, and then have a real hard time walking away from it, right? It's the foods that we know are not satisfying, not nourishing, not satisfying from the sense that we feel full. Like we can easily just keep eating and eating and eating and be like, wait a second, did I just eat a whole bag of chips? and like then compounding that stress or the anxiety, because then we often feel bad about ourselves and our choices. And so trying to help people get out of that cycle and recognize that there's many other options, and strategies for helping.
So you have 2 daughters, right?
So I do. I have 2 teenage daughters at home with me.
Uh-huh.
And I remarried.
Yes.
And I have a son who was, when he came into my life, he was 10. And he is now 22.
Wow.
So he doesn't live at home with us. He's in Texas, or actually New Mexico now. But yeah, so there were 3 children, in the mix when I decided, and my current, my husband now, he was all on board with adopting this way of eating. And I'd say he had greater, or he noticed more than I did in terms of physical health. Changes that he experienced from changing his diet. And so it's been fun. It's been a bit of an adventure at times, raising 3 kids, and now having Brandon out on his own and feeling really proud, because as a teenager, he did his own thing sometimes, in terms of his food choices, going, as my teenage daughters are doing now, with friends and making their own choices that are not entirely, plant-based. And I'm so happy to see that he's now returned. And yeah, and like, if
Prodigal
there are
son,
animal foods that he consumes, I'd say that it's minimal, it's not on a daily basis. And he's realized, how good he feels, choosing, whole foods, and also, on a budget, like beans and rice are wonderful
That's
options.
some good stuff. That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
So how did the transition go when your kids switched to more plant-based? Was it easy? How was the school environment? And were they bringing their own, lunches, or how did that go?
Yeah, so pretty well, I think. They ate what I prepared, and again, like I cooked a lot as a mom, and so we weren't going out for fast food. So it's not like they had this huge change in like, we're not going to McDonald's ever again, because it wasn't something that we did, often anyway. And at that point, right, they're going back and forth between two homes. So I'd say that was maybe a little bit easier for them to some extent, because like when they were at their dad's house, right, like that household wasn't plant-based.
Mhm.
So they still had, I think it was like maybe an easier transition for them from that standpoint.
Mhm.
And, they've been great about it. They have always taken their lunch to school. One, because I know that when I pack their lunches, the food will be healthier.
Mhm.
And two, because they prefer it. Like they like having a packed lunch better. They don't enjoy the school lunches. And so that wasn't, a change for them either. I'd say living outside of DC when we did for a couple of years, when I first started working for the physicians committee, that environment made it, I think, much easier for them compared to where we live now, because it's such a melting pot of cultures and religions. And there were just more people, I think, open-minded about eating a plant-based diet, or who were also doing that for a variety of reasons, that they had such a mix of friends who were really accepting. Like, I just remember other kids' moms and dads and families just being like, oh, okay, Lauren's coming over for dinner, like we'll have something without meat, or Carly's coming, what can I prepare for her?
Mhm.
It was wonderful. And now we live north of Baltimore, in a county that is not super healthy, and where farming is pretty big, like, meat and dairy. And it's just really, and it's also not as diverse,
Mhm.
culturally, even religiously. And yeah, it's interesting. Like it just feels like a lot more lonely, I think, for them, because they
Mhm.
are the only kids doing this,
Yeah.
and people are not as accepting or curious either.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. You wouldn't expect that,
Mhm.
but then
Yeah.
again, yeah, you would expect it.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I really think at this point, I'm just like, like people are so used to eating meat and dairy, and especially if that is all they've known their whole life. And I've just come to accept that I am not, or at least in my approach with people, I feel like it's really changed in how I talk about it, recognizing that like I'm not changing anyone
Isn't that the
unless they, have like even just the slightest curiosity, or wanting to have the conversation, or think about changing themselves.
Mhm.
right? Yeah, sure. Well, we're coming up on
Mhm.
our close. We have maybe just a couple minutes left, so we have like 2 hot questions for you. Okay.
Yeah, awesome.
All right. If there was one thing you could recommend to people watching or listening
Mhm.
that would make a difference for either changing their diet or making a positive step forward, what would you recommend?
Yeah, I would recommend, okay, so here's my recommendation, to take a look at the 4 plant-based food groups, like from the Physicians Committee's Power Plate. You can, go to pcrm.org, see the visual of the Power Plate. It's fruits, vegetables, legumes, whole grains, and ask yourself, like, which of those foods do you want to include more of? Kind of do like a little inventory, see how many of those foods you're currently eating and what you can do to eat more of them, right? That would be 1. And then 2, like ask yourself, like, what do you have to lose from testing out a plant-based diet for 3 weeks? Like, give yourself 3 weeks. What do you have to lose by running that experiment? Because in my experience, the people who do that are so grateful for taking on that challenge and recognizing like you can do anything for 3 weeks. Because in making that big change and kind of jumping in, it often, and I am a fan, like I meet people where they are, and small changes are awesome to build upon. And if you're willing to take on that experiment, it really can just open your mind and do a lot for your health in that short amount of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. That's great. Great recommendations.
Yeah. So then if people want to learn more about what you're working on or what you're doing with PCRM, where can they find you?
Sure. So certainly going to pcrm.org is wonderful. There's all kinds of free resources for healthcare professionals. There's free CME for like free, lots and lots of opportunities to learn more about a plant-based diet and other topics, and get your continuing education credits at the same time. And you can also go to my personal website, which is karensmithrd.com. And, there's ways for you to get in touch. And, if you have questions, absolutely reach out. I'd be happy to help.
Okay, great. We will be sure to put those links in the show notes so people can check them out.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's been such a pleasure to get to sit and talk with you again. This is wonderful. Yeah, we always enjoy our conversations with you.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, our pleasure.
Yes, our pleasure.
All right. Well, we will see you next time, I'm sure, soon.
I hope so. Maybe
All
one
right.
day in person.
Yeah,
Yes,
wouldn't that be
yes.
amazing? We'll have to make that happen. All right. Have a great week and we'll see you next time.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. 6 Million Seeds is made possible by the generosity of Bruno Chiropractic, Acme Construction Metals, EXP Realty, and Deck It Out Builders. Thanks, guys, for all your support.